This is going to be a really quick video covering Unity terrain. Uh, Quick note, this is only for Unity 2018.2 or older. Uh, as soon as you get into newer versions, the Unity system changes a bit, in my opinion, to the better. Um, but for those of us that are using the older versions, hopefully this will help a little bit. So we're going to start by creating a Unity terrain. We're going to go up here into Game Object and 3D Object Terrain, and it's going to create this gigantic terrain here. And we're going to do a couple of things with this before we get started. So we're going to go over into the terrain settings, down here to where it says resolution, and we're going to change ours to 200 by 200, and it's important that it ends up being square, so that's important for having that. And I'm going to give my terrain a height of 60. I don't need to go super high with that. Then, depending on the amount of detail that you want in your terrain, you can change the height map resolution. Let me just demonstrate that really quick here. If I choose a brush in my painting here that creates a lot of detail, you can sort of see that, and then it sort of smoothed itself out. Now let me go back to my settings, and I'll change my height map resolution to 1025. Notice it's power of 2 plus 1, hence the 513 instead of 512. You'll see also as soon as you change this, it actually resets anything, so you need to change this before you start sculpting. So let's just do that exact same brush, and we'll go in here. And you'll see that that's kept a lot more of that little detail that we have. So really, depending on the amount of detail you're wanting in your terrain, the better. It does take up more memory. It does have its extra challenges, but it's nice to be able to do that. I'm going to leave that alone. I'll just undo my painting here. And let's just double check. So that put that right back down to 513. I'm going to go ahead and change that to 1025. Detail resolution, that's going to have to do with when we paint things like grass and stuff like that. I'm not going to touch that for right now, but really you would want to change that before you started to do too much. We'll get to that in the next video later. All right. So really I want to just review these tools here. The first thing that I would like to do is put some texture on here. So we want to go grab some textures that will work in here. So I'll go ahead and create a folder. I'm going to call it textures folder. And while I'm in here, I might as well make at least one more folder here. I'll create a mesh folder as well. You would possibly create an animations folder, materials folder, all those kinds of things. I think this will be enough for right now. In my textures folder, I am going to drag in some textures that I already have that I'll use for my project here. And so I'm just going to an older file for this, and we'll grab some old textures here so we can see. Let's see. Let's see. We want some terrain textures, right? We'll grab a bunch of these right in here, and I'll just do type. I'll grab all my JPEGs, and I'll drag those in. Let those come in. I'll also see if there's any TIFFs or targas in here, and I'll drag those in as well. Yep, we've got some targas and TIFFs. We'll bring those in as well, just for something to use. All right, and again, being able to bring those in, ahead of time would, before you start doing a lot in here, would help quite a bit. All right, so we'll just wait for this to come in. And there they are. Excellent. Now, the first thing that I would suggest you do whenever you bring in a texture, if you're bringing in normal maps, you're going to want to select those normal maps and change their texture type in the inspector, right? So instead of default, you want to change those to normal maps. You want to make sure that create from grayscale is off in this case because they are not gray. We'll leave it at that, and we'll go ahead and say apply, and that now reads as a normal map. I'm just going to do that for these as well, just holding down Control to select them all, and I'll change all of them at the same time and say apply, and it will adjust all of those. All right, great. All right, so let's go ahead and put some texture on this. We'll just put a basic grass on here to start. I'm going to click on the little paintbrush here and then on Edit Textures, and I'll say Add Texture, and I can either drag in or say Select, and this window pops open, and I could choose whatever I wanted. I'll go ahead and use this grass too. If I had a associated normal map, I could put that in there as well. Notice that I've left my metallic and smoothness to 0. I don't want my terrain to look shiny or anything like that. We'll come back to this in a minute. Let's just go ahead and hit OK. Now you can see that the first texture puts that everywhere, right? So we've got that the whole green on there as well. Now, I like to be able to sort of know what kind of scale I'm working with. You can always create an object and bring it in to get a sense of scale, but I find that really the best thing to do is to bring in, the player controller that we're going to use. And to do that, we want to import a package. And so I have the asset store open here, and I've just looked for the standard assets. I've already downloaded it. I'm going to go ahead and say import. And that's going to bring up a window here in just a second after this is done. So here's this window. I just pause it there for a second while it imported everything. Here it all is. You really don't need everything here, but we'll just go ahead and import all. And so it'll bring in those packages, and it's going to create another folder called Standard Assets over here. So we'll just give that a minute. So you can see that we've got that standard assets folder right in there. So I'll switch back to my scene here, and what I'm going to do is open up my standard assets. I'm going to go into the characters folder, into the first person folder, into the prefabs folder, and I'm going to use this FPS Controller prefab, and I'll just drop that into here, into my hierarchy, and we'll hit F, and you'll see that it brought it right to the origin there. I'm just going to move that over a little bit here, and then move it up a little bit like that, and I'll just hit play, and we'll see what that does. See, it brings me into the game, and I can walk around with that, just using the WASD and the mouse to look around in direction. I'll go ahead and get out of this, but you'll notice that my grass ended up looking a little bit large here. So let's go back into my terrain, into those brush settings, into this texture. We'll say Edit Texture, and I'm going to say Edit that right there. You'll see it brings this up. Now, if I bring this size down, right, we'll bring this down here. Let's see if I can pull that off there. There we go. I'll bring that down to say 10. You can see that it's getting smaller, right, as I go. And I think for that texture, that's not that bad. But for different textures, you're going to maybe want to change the different scales in that. So just something to think about, right? We'll get back into the textures here in just a minute. I want to work on actually sculpting some of the terrain here first. But we do have sort of a sense of a scale here, right, with our little character that we can keep testing with that. Now, the first thing we have is the raise and lower terrain. And we can see, oh, okay, I can raise that up. Great, I'll undo that. and hold shift and click to lower. So if I hold shift, you'll notice I can't go down, right? It won't let me go down. The reason for that is because right now the terrain is at its lowest possible. So what we typically do is we'll actually start with this second button here, in which we can paint the height. Now, let me just sort of pull this out here a little bit. And I've got a height set to 8 here, and I'm going to just use this sort of solid circle here as my brush size. And I'll bring my opacity all the way up. You can see that I'm painting to that specific height, right? And it takes me very rapidly up to that height, right? So, you know, great way to create things like plateaus and stuff like that. But it's also going to allow me to go down, right? So if I grab this guy now if I hold down the shift and paint, you can see that, you know, I can go down. So that's going to be very helpful. I'm going to change my height here to about 5, and I'm going to just flatten the entire terrain based on this color. So bam, right like that. That's great. And now if I go back here, I can adjust, you know, and I can go up, right? Or I can hold down shift and I can go down, right? And so we can see too that I'm hitting that cap very quickly. If I hold down shift, right, I'm getting, you know, very low very quickly there. All right, let's just see what that scale looks like when we play our game, right? So whoops, so I've got my terrain moved a little bit here. So we'll just make sure my guy, let's go make sure my controller here, that's why, see, he's now below the terrain. This is because of that flood. Let's bring him up here. Great. So let's hit play. And there we go. And I'll walk around and I'll say, okay, well, you know, that's not too deep. So maybe I'll go a little bit deeper with that, and I'll maybe switch it back to that 8 value. So I'll go in and, for me, put a flatten of 8, and that's where we'll start. Make sure I bring my controller up here so they can do it. And I'm going to turn off the head bob right now, as well as the sound. I don't really need that right now, just to give a little bit sort of smoother way of watching this. All right, great. Let's go back into our sculpting. Now, for our project in the class, we only want to worry about sort of a corridor that we're painting here, and about 60 meters by 200 meters is all we're worried about. I'm just going to sort of estimate that a little bit, and we'll go back into my terrain. I don't want to paint like all the way super high here, but I will create sort of a general sense of my scene, and I want it to sort of be like I'm going slightly up a hill here. So I'm going to make my brush pretty big, and we'll make my opacity a little bit lower. And let's see here, let's make this my height. So I'm just going to sort of bring this over. I could even do this with the flatten. Maybe that's what I'll do instead, is I'll paint a higher area here. Let's go up maybe about 3 meters or so. And so we'll just bring this and bring that opacity all the way up. We can even use our, there we go. Sort of bring this up something like that. All right, that looks good. Let's maybe bring this down to 10, and then we'll paint an area here, and you can see I've sort of got this little stair step going on there. We'll worry about that in a minute. Let's go down to maybe 10.5, or sorry, 9.5. All right, and do a little bit more. All right, right in there. And let's go down to 9. And let's go down to 8.5. All right, sort of fill in that area there a little bit. We can always add to the sides here if we want. And then let's go down to 8.25. And we'll just make this the lower portion right here. All right, great. So you can sort of see we've got this weird stepping. Let's go ahead and use our smooth. and we can smooth that all out. Alright, so we'll just keep working, smoothing that out. So we can get that transition to be smoother. Okay, there we go. All right, and we could even, so this was 11 something. I think this was 11, so we could go back to our flatten here and maybe call this 11.2 and maybe bring that opacity down just to add. That's maybe a bit too much. Let's just try 11. Let's try 10.75. There we go. And then we'll go back to the smooth again. And we'll transition that a little bit like that. All right, great. So you can see, now I've got this sort of slow rise, and we're going to sculpt more of that as we go. Let's go ahead and add some sort of broad terrain on either side here. A little bit off center there. That's okay. Let's just add, bring that opacity down. You can see I can start to bring up and smooth this out a bit. Okay, yeah, starting to get some cool terrain. Now what we don't want to do is we don't want to add like a huge sort of vertical side. If we do that, we're going to have to fill that in with models, which is going to be very important because Unity Terrain doesn't handle that that vertical really well, right? We want to make sure that our texture is not stretched or anything like that. So we'll make sure that we add a good amount here. So you can see maybe a little bit more opacity, bring that up a little faster. Just being careful with that. And sort of thinking about outside, like, hey, I want to give this sense of depth in here. And, we can always go back and smooth things a little bit. All right, so, keeping working here. And you can always use shift and lower it again, right? So hopefully you get the idea here. We're not going to finish this. All right. I think we're going to turn off our lighting down here. So we'll click in the lighting tab and just turn off auto generate, and that'll speed us up a little bit. Okay, so we can keep working with this. And let's see what we have here. Let's smooth this out. And see, that to me feels like it's a little bit too steep right there. So And add some mountains or hills that sort of build up to that a little bit. And even sort of add some in here. Okay, maybe bring that down a little bit, right like that. All right, so you sort of get a sense of this. And again, we can also, sort of create a sense of, distant terrain out in the distance here, right? To give a sense of depth in our scene. We don't need to worry too much about this one. All right, it can be a little higher. We can even stretch those up a bit, right? To get a sense, right, of how that looks. And a little bit more smooth, maybe. And we could also add in a little bit of chaos by choosing some of these other brushes, right, that will give us some terrain. And that may be too much, but we can always throw it on here and then do some smoothing as well. Let's just see where we're at here. Let's grab our first-person controller here. Let's maybe bring it over here. Whoop. Bring it over here. And maybe a little bit further down. And let's hit play. So here I am. So it's a little dark right now. So let me just pause that for a second and turn my lighting back on. Down there. Auto-generate that. Now we'll hit play. And we can sort of see as I'm moving around, right? You can get a sense of where I am. So you can see I definitely have some areas that I can get through, which I don't want to be able to do. Some look a little bit too steep, like that one, or isolated. So does that one, right? But I also like the sort of the extra detail that I've got in here by adding some of that chaos. All right, so you can really work on this, by just playing around, right? So back into our in here, maybe I'll bring this down a little bit, hold down Shift. So an area like that, and then we need to bring up some other areas. Use a little bit of smooth. Always find the smooth, the opacity needs to be much higher. Maybe bring this down just a tad. All right. Maybe add a little bit more chaos into here. So just adding a little bit more in there. All right. So anyway, adding your textures, right? Like that's, adding sculpting out your models, right? To get something that's interesting, right? Like that. Then we can go back to texturing, right? And start to think about, oh, okay, I want to add in some texture here. So let's add another texture. I'll say I'll add a Oh, let's see, find my textures here. Here's my textures. Let's use a like a soil rough here, right like that. Um, and we'll just do it that way. And let's go ahead and make my brush a little smaller. Okay, let's make sure we hit add here. All right, and we'll select this. And we'll just say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and make my opacity 100% here so we can sort of see it. And even the target strength here, make sure I get a nice solid painting. Oh, I'm passing the wrong direction. There we go. And I'm painting the wrong one. Come on. There we go. Oh, something like that. Now, if we look at this, let's go ahead and hit play. Right, we can see that, you know, the size of the dirt is massive, right? So we want to definitely change that. So we'll go ahead and pause that. Let's bring that target strength up a little bit. And I'm going to say edit this texture. I want to bring this down. Watch what happens in the viewport here. I'm going to bring that down to like 5. You see that gives us a much, much better sort of scale for, you know, what we have there, right? And I can always paint the grass back in, right? And swap this out. I like to throw in maybe like a splotchier one like this. And we could do like a little path here. You know, something like that. And work our way, you know, to where our village or whatever would be back here. All right. So there we go. Right, we've got that little area. Let's add another texture. And this time, let's go ahead and add in like this texture here to add a little variety to our grass, perhaps. Now you'll notice I'm avoiding all of the textures that came with the environment and all of that kind of stuff that came in with those standard assets, right? I don't want you guys to use those, so make sure that you are using the appropriate textures, right? So I'm going to go ahead and probably bring this down to about 5 as well. We'll say add. And let's see what this does. Let's go over here. Let's maybe make my brush just a tad bigger. And let's do one with a lot of holes in it. All right, and you see that's added in some variety in that texture. Maybe bring that brush size down a little bit. And if we bring our target strength down and our opacity down a little bit, we'll see that we don't paint 100%, right? We're sort of blending it in there. Can you see that? Right, so we can add some variety with our grass all through in here. Can even blend it into the edges of our dirt here a little bit. So you can spend a decent amount of time adding to your textures, adding some cool look. Let's add one more texture here. We'll say add texture. This time I'll find one of my mud rock. Let's do the rock one here. Maybe we'll do 2 more textures. I'll add that one there. And then for this, I'll add its corresponding rock, so the normal map, right, like that. And we'll just say add. And, oh, I don't know, let's add it to the top of this. So we'll grab that. I want this to be like completely rock, so I'm going to bring my target strength up, right? And so you can see I'm starting to paint my rock in there. Right, and I would say that that's probably a little too large as well. So let's go ahead and edit that texture. And let's bring it down. Let's try 5, maybe 3, and 3. We start to see a lot of tiling there. Let's maybe bring it 5 and 5. All right, we'll keep painting that a bit. And one of the things that we could do is you can see that, this is definitely, you can see it tiling, right? Is we could add in another rock, right? Say add another texture, and we'll choose another rock texture here. Let's see, there's mud. Let's see, let's, we could do this rock, we could do this rock. Let's do this one, because it has a normal map as well. So we'll choose that one there, and then we'll choose the normal that went with it. Choose that one. All right, and let's try a 5 and a 5. All right, we'll make sure we're painting that one. Let's bring our target strength down a little bit. You can see I can start to blend in some other rocks, and it starts to hide the tiling of the other one, right? And so that's, starting to not be as obvious. You see I'm also sort of blending into the grass there a little bit. You can always adjust your target strength. Okay, and you're like, oh, I painted too much there, so just go back to the other rock. Right? So let's just take one more texture here. Let's say add texture, and I'll choose let's see here. Let's use this brown mud here, and I'm going to bring that pretty low, and I'll choose a different brush. Let's do this one. Let's see what that does. Oops, let's make sure I'm painting with the brown. All right, just adding some variety all through that. You can even get some dirt patches. All right, so let's just see what it looks like now when we hit play. So you can see we've got some variety. See where we blended that? That looks a lot better. It gives a little bit more variety in there. Right? If we go over here to our rock, we can definitely see that it's got texture there, not just the normal map, right? But also some sculpt texture that I've done. I can always go back, smooth that, or add more, whatever works with that. So we want to spend some time creating our terrain and getting the look that we're going for. Hopefully that's helpful, and let me know if you need any help.